Hello and welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. In this video, I'm going to share with you some news involving research involving humans. The first one is a fascinating one, and absolutely stunning. And it's a discovery such that it could rewrite the early history of the Native Americans. In an article found in the journal Nature, reveals that the long-held belief of a single founding population of Native Americans may be in need of a drastic alteration. Why is that? The long-buried remains of an infant girl are helping to rewrite what archaeologists know about the initial migration of humans to North America. This infant girl, around 6 weeks old at the time of her death, was discovered by archaeologists in Alaska back in 2013. The find was interesting but not groundbreaking until they decided to examine her DNA. And they thought that her genetics would match up with those of other early Native Americans. Well, guess what? The infant is now thought to have been one of an entirely different lineage of early settlers in North America. The group, which scientists have taken to calling ancient Beringians, because they would have traversed the Beringia land bridge from Siberia into North America. For those of you who may not be familiar, there's a thing called the Bering Strait, which separates western Alaska from the easternmost points of Russia. Well, during the ice ages, sea levels fell. And the Bering Sea itself is a shallow shelf. It's only 50 to 100 meters deep. It's really not deep at all. It's average about 50 meters deep. So when the sea levels fell, all this land was exposed, and it's just one big continuous thing. And in fact, it isolated, it cut off the Pacific Ocean from communicating with the Arctic Ocean. That's another video and topic for discussion for those interested in the oceanographic end of things. So, the new research suggests that when the last ice age came to a close, humans began to move into North America from Siberia. That's been pretty much known and been pretty well established. What was not previously known is that the population split off into two groups, either before or shortly after coming to present-day America. The settlers that we think of today as Native Americans arose from one of those groups, but other populations didn't follow them south. And it's likely that they remained in the north for thousands of years. Inuits, perhaps? The remains of the infant and another like her have been dated to around 11,500 years ago, meaning by that point the split between ancient Beringians and Native Americans had already been well established. Amazing what DNA can inform us. So now researchers are trying to figure out, what's this previously unknown population of ancient settlers? And maybe is there a link from ancient Beringians and modern day populations in the region, if it exists? So this is wonderful about science. You find new stuff there, and it's mind-blowing, and it makes you rethink everything. And it's just really always interesting to learn of new things. So that to me is a really telling story, especially since that I live in Alaska, so this is kind of cool. The next story I wish to share with you is that the mystery over death of 15 million Aztecs may be finally solved. Scientists have discovered, or may have discovered, the cause of an epidemic that struck Mexico's Aztec population in 1545, killing up to 15 million people. In a paper published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, Professor Ashul Vagin is a co-author of the study, and what this group found was that they extracted DNA from the teeth of 29 skeletons that were buried, and this analysis revealed previously unidentified traces of the Salmonella enterica bacterium. This bacterium is known to cause enteric fever, of which typhoid is an example. Symptoms of enteric fever agree with those that are mentioned in records from the time. Symptoms such as red spots on the skin, vomiting, and bleeding from various body orifices. Enteric fever is not pleasant in the slightest. Okay. This epidemic was one of several to hit indigenous populations with the arrival of Europeans. When Europeans arrived in Mexico, they brought with them many different types of diseases. This is basically a decimation of indigenous populations. Mortality rates may have been 80 or 90% by 1600. That's 55 years. Imagine you have a disease and 8 or 9 out of 10 people die from it. That's quite horrifying. I'd like to take a moment to mention, related to this, a really important work by Professor Jared Diamond. Professor Diamond wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a superb piece of scientific work. Absolutely comprehensive, exhaustive, in the breadth and depth of this coverage and his discussions. And then he basically talks about how interactions and introductions to Europeans and the diseases, and how the diseases were able to spread so rapidly and decimating a lot of the native populations. If you ever have a chance to read the book, I suggest you do. It's not light reading, but it helps put into perspective some of the things that have gone on. To talk about adding insult to injury, this enteric fever. Sorry about that. Little Doctor Who TARDIS materialization. But just this enteric fever epidemic came just 2 decades after smallpox that killed up to 8 million people just after the Spanish arrival. So we had 8 million dying from the smallpox, up to 15 million from the enteric fever. That's 23 million people. That basically just about wiping out everyone. So I wanted to share that with you. However, as is typical in science, often debate ensued. So I want to share with you the thoughts of another researcher, Elizabeth Graham. She's a professor of archaeology at University College in London, and she gives a different take. She does not think that Salmonella was necessarily the root cause of the epidemic. What she says that people may have been getting sick because of a different disease, which means that they were compromised, less likely to look after themselves, but because they might have been compromised, it made them more susceptible to when Salmonella hits them. Okay, so she's of the opinion that, okay, they were in a weakened state. Salmonella may be a sign of people not being able to care for one another because you're already sickened, you're more susceptible, so you're more prone to contract the disease. And if you're already in a weakened state and Salmonella strikes you, your chances of it being fatal are quite high. And like everything else, research is needed. So Professor Graham basically says, hey, infectious diseases are difficult to identify, and like everything else, we just need more studies to tease this out. But we definitely have an indicator of how to proceed with further investigations. The next story involves Europeans. You might have seen this in the news recently. It comes out of Great Britain. And the first Europeans had quite a striking combination of features. At 10,000 years old, and they call this guy Cheddar Man. One of the oldest known Homo sapiens found in England, as being also one of the most complete skeletons. Ancient DNA reveals that he had a striking combination of dark skin and pale eyes. That's the telling aspect. Okay. New facial reconstruction. Modelers at Kenneth & Kenneth Reconstructions worked with Britain's Natural History Museum to sculpt this Mesolithic man. And Tom Booth, a postdoctoral researcher in paleobiology at the museum, he said in a statement, they had dark skin and most of them had pale colored eyes, either blue or green, dark brown hair. This color combination would be unusual today. Not unheard of, just unusual. Ancient DNA evidence suggests that it was the norm among the hunter-gatherers of northern continental Europe during the Mesolithic. Pale eyes apparently evolved in early Europeans before pale skin. Pale skin apparently evolved after the advent of agriculture, according to Dr. Booth. Lighter skin absorbs more UV light than darker skin. Okay, UV light, ultraviolet, is necessary for humans to produce vitamin D. So the ability to absorb more of it helps people at higher latitude, which see less sunlight than people in equatorial regions. Right? So in other words, having pale skin allows you to absorb vitamin D to avoid vitamin D deficiency. So this is obviously a transitional state going on here. Any of you who live in a subarctic or Arctic regime, such as in Scandinavia or Yukon territories, Alaska, northern Russia, know all about the changing light levels. And that, for example, where I live in Fairbanks, during winter solstice, the sun is above the horizon for 3 hours and 40 minutes during winter solstice. Not much light going on then. So whatever little light there, the body wants to absorb the vitamin D into your skin and so forth. Now what's interesting is that this particular person, Cheddar Man, was discovered in 1903. But like everything else, 1903 they didn't have DNA. They did not even know about DNA back then. Okay. Like anything else, new techniques become available. You can then re-examine specimens. So that's an interesting thing there, that it has people moving further and further north have not yet made the transition to lighter colored skin, but the lighter colored eyes did evolve first, and that helps with reducing, dealing with glare. The reflection of sunlight off, say, the snow-covered surface. Having lighter eyes helps with that. The next story I'd like to share with you, kind of one of those interesting ones that kind of makes you stop and think about things. An ancient virus may be responsible for human consciousness. Believe it or not, within our DNA are remnants of viral DNA. They may not be active, but they're there. Some people refer to them as junk DNA, but they're there. That gives evidence for, of an ancient, long ago common ancestor, that we still have remnants of such DNA material. There's 2 papers published in the journal Cell. Long ago, a virus bound its genetic code to the genome of 4-limbed animals. Tetrapods, basically. That snippet of code is still very much alive in human brains today, where it does the very viral task of packaging up genetic information and sending it from nerve cells to their neighbors in little capsules that look like viruses themselves. Typically what a virus is usually a protein coat, sometimes a polysaccharide coat, that surrounds some sort of genetic material. Could be a strand of DNA, could be a strand of RNA. It's very basic like that. So you don't see anything like a nucleus, you don't see mitochondria, you don't see ribosomes, or any other cell organelles within the virus. It's very, very tiny, much smaller than bacteria, which are very, very tiny. But it's basically some sort of coating around a strand of genetic material. That's what a virus is. Is it alive? Is it inert? Whatever. Typically, viruses, if they're not attached inside of a host cell, they're inert. Once they attach themselves to a host cell, they become active by injecting that piece of genetic material into the host cell, where that genetic material then hijacks or takes over some of the nuclear genetic, not nuclear, but just the genetic material. For example, bacteriophage. The viral DNA will actually break that single loop of bacterial DNA. Most bacteria have a single loop of DNA. It will split it at some point and insert that little sequence, and then it will force the bacteria to make replicate copies of the virus. So when they talk about these little capsules, that's what they're basically talking about. You've got these little viral capsules that are helping to propagate information. Information being what travels down the nerve pathways. So, and of course, if they're traveling down these nerve pathways, guess what? That's communicating, the form of communicating nerve signals. So these nerves, they help nerves communicate, reorganize over time, and these are tasks that are considered to be necessary for higher order thinking. So a review published in Cell in 2016 found that between 40 and 80% of the human genome arrived from some archaic viral invasion. Okay. There's more to this story, but I think I'll leave it right at that. I'll let you, that's the main point of this story, is that we have a lot of viral DNAs composing our genome, and this viral DNA might have helped us become conscious. The last story I want to share with you is one that is quite frightening. This story involving a boy, and he had a very strange choking episode. It's not what it turns out to be, what you might think it to be. What is eosinophilic esophagitis? 14-year-old boy in Missouri appeared to choke on a ham and cheese sandwich. Turns out that this 14-year-old has a rare immune condition that can injure the esophagus. I won't give you the boy's name, but he was eating the sandwich, and when he seemed to, and he was basically involved in a soccer game, something going on, and he seemed to start choking, and he had chest pains. So he was rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered there was a tear in his esophagus. When they operated to repair this tear, they found the wound was infected. And this boy had developed sepsis. Sepsis is basically system-wide infection. Sepsis is, of course, potentially life-threatening. Okay. Now, you would think, wait a second, choking on a sandwich? You shouldn't get an infection from that. Well, this boy spent 100 days in the hospital. And this is when doctors discovered what's actually going on. A chronic immune disease system called eosinophilic esophagitis. Now, eosinophilic refers to eosinophils, which is one type of white blood cells. So this is involving the immune system. You have different types of white blood cells. You have lymphocytes, leukocytes, basophils, neutrophils. You have all sorts of different types of white blood cells that are part of the immune system that have different functions in what they attack, what diseases they invading foreign particles that they attack, and so forth. So when a person has eosinophilic esophagitis, white blood cells called eosinophils, okay, build up in the lining on the esophagus. Now this buildup can occur as a reaction to foods, allergens, maybe acid reflux. Okay. It's almost like if you eat certain foods, you can go into anaphylactic shock or whatever. We have a histamine reaction and so forth, involving the immune system. This condition causes inflammation of the esophagus, which in turn leads to tissue damage that can make it difficult to swallow or cause food to get stuck in the throat. That's basically what happened to this poor kid. When you have such an inflammation, the esophagus is more prone to tearing, as again, what happened to this boy. Okay. Basically using what's called an endoscope, which is a tube that's inserted down the throat, has a camera on it, that goes to a monitor with a light on it to light up and so that the doctor can see what's going on. Now here's the thing. This condition affects 1 in 1,000 children, 0.1%. That's a high rate. So it's not as rare as they want to make you sound it. Patients with eosinophilic esophagitis may need to modify their diet to remove foods that can trigger the flare-ups of the conditions. So, kind of a little on the scary side that, you can have these incidences or situations where your immune system kind of goes off the track, off the rails a bit. So, if you know of a child who's choking with chest pains, you may want to start thinking about eosinophilic esophagitis. That brings me to the end of this particular video. I remind you to go to patreon.com/Science Talk with Jim Massa and become a patron and support this work. If you're already doing so, thank you for your support. Please inform others of the work that I do here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching the video.